Hello, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. My name is Karthik Vijayaraghavan, and with me today is my co-host Cody Allen. Cody, do you want to say hello to the group?
Hey everyone, great to be back. I know I don't think I've been here for a week or so it's good to be back in my familiar spot. Thanks for having me back, Karthik.
It's great to have you here, Cody. And also today we have our guest speaker, Becky Brown. Becky, do you
Hi,
want to say hello?
everyone. Yeah, so my name is Becky, and I'm calling in from Studio 3T, which is a GUI for working with NoSQL databases. So I'm joining today to go through just a quick demo and a walkthrough of the 3T tools for working with NoSQL. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Becky. So folks that have joined us today, like Becky said, we'll be going into a deep demo with Studio 3T, and Becky is going to show how this tool integrates with Amazon DocumentDB. For those of you that are new to Amazon DocumentDB, DocumentDB is a fully managed, scalable, fast, and MongoDB compatible database service. So Studio 3T is a great tool and IDE for you to connect with MongoDB and work. You can do the same stuff with DocumentDB as well. Again, our idea with DocumentDB is to help the developer community leverage the knowledge they've gained with MongoDB APIs, operators, and query languages, and work with DocumentDB. So with that, I'll pass it to Becky to share how Studio 3T works, and let's let the comments flow. And Cody and I will be moderating the chat, and we'll be asking questions on your behalf. So Becky, I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Karthik. So I'm sharing my screen now, and what we're taking a look at is the Studio 3T tool. Just to give some background information, the 3T tools include Robo3T as well as Studio 3T, and I'm guessing those of you who have been working with NoSQL are probably familiar with Robo3T. We're going to be actually migrating the Robo3T code base onto the Studio 3T code base in a few months. And so this is going to be a demo that focuses on the Studio 3T code base, just because we're going to be incorporating both tools into the same code base soon. And for those of you who are familiar with working with NoSQL, perhaps you've come across our tools before. We officially support working with MongoDB databases. We do have a large minority user base that works with a plethora of other NoSQL databases, and DocumentDB is definitely one of the big up-and-coming databases that we've seen a large minority user base that continues to grow. So we do best efforts to support DocumentDB, and because MongoDB and DocumentDB are so similar, it's easy to use the tool when working with DocumentDB as well. So what I'm going to be doing is demoing with a DocumentDB database. You can see that in my connection window here. And one of the things that we know that a lot of folks are going through is trying to figure out how to migrate. So perhaps you're looking to migrate from a MongoDB environment and you need to migrate data into a DocumentDB environment. When you're looking at your connection window here, I also have a MongoDB connection. And one thing that you can do with Studio 3T in that situation is you can easily copy and paste data between environments. So let's say we would like to migrate my DB into the DocumentDB environment. I can right click, go to add database. Let's just call this a test database, because we're going to be using this as a test environment. There's no data
I'll
here.
add one thing here too, Becky.
Yeah, go for it.
Coming from, just my anecdotally, my own, before I was promoted to AWS employee and I was an AWS customer, we went through this process. We went through a MongoDB to DocumentDB migration, and it was so cool because, like you said, Studio 3T supported both. I mean, we were able to connect to MongoDB for one, and then DocumentDB through a separate connection. And just having that ability to give my developers a single tool, a tool they're already familiar with, to do what you're doing, not even going to the depths that we're going to go through here, but just clicking on a GUI and saying, well, what do my records look like on this namespace, and compare it to this. Like, they were very easy. It was very easy for them to scroll through and just do a visual comparison. That's powerful. Instead of having an app over here and an app over here and trying to translate it and, figure out how to use it, or maybe Mongo shell here and Studio 3T here. No, everything was here. I mean, everything was just one spot, and that just made it so much easier for me personally, but also for our development team leaders.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really glad to hear that was helpful. And yeah, if you're looking to do that type of migration, you can just really quickly use hotkeys, or you can use the right-click contextual menu to copy an entire database and then paste that to that new one that I just created. So we've at this point just migrated data from MongoDB into DocumentDB. And you didn't have to open the shell. You didn't have to write any scripts. You didn't have to Google how to do that. You can just really quickly use the GUI for that. So this can be a helpful
Why didn't I
tool.
know that existed? That's amazing. Jeez.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, that's why we like to do product demos like this, because there's just a lot that the tool can do that people might miss on first glance. So, always reach out if there's a team or colleagues that you think might benefit from a walkthrough. Always feel free to just drop us a note, and we'd be happy to do demo sessions with folks who are looking to learn more about what the 3T tools do. And when you're taking a look at the connection window here, if you have indexes, you can click the caret to view those indexes. And when you're taking a look at this connection window, right-clicking just to see what the options are is pretty helpful. I can get through, I'll go through some of these in more detail later, but this is where you'd be able to add an index. You'd be able to take a look at slow running operations from the current operations view, and you can take a look at server status charts if you're doing monitoring. But again, I'll go over some of those in more detail later. I think for the beginning of the demo, I'd like to focus more on the querying capability that's in Studio 3T, because this is what most people spend the majority of their time doing using Studio 3T for. What we're looking at right now is the collection tool, and you can always use the top toolbar, or you can double click in order to open the collection tool. You have different view options. So we have tree view, where you can use the caret to view embedded fields. You also have JSON view for people who prefer to view their data in JSON. And there's also table view. And for people who are coming from a SQL environment in particular, or have a SQL background, this can be a more familiar, comfortable way to view data. We have some view options. So depending upon your experience level with embedded objects and arrays, you may want to color code by field type. So you can have, I've color coded embedded objects as blue. And that just helps me when I'm exploring my data. I can really quickly identify which fields contain embedded fields, so I can see that a trace is embedded.
Very important topic here, the color of it, right? Because I saw that. I saw it a second ago. You right-clicked on demo customers, and like towards the bottom, we saw the server info, and there was, select a color. Is there a dark?
Yes.
Is there a dark theme for Studio 3T?
There is a dark theme. Yeah, we added it maybe a year ago, and we've been improving it. I think that the first iteration was not very beautiful, but I think that where we're at now looks a lot better than when we first released it. So that was
most important piece. I love it.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it was definitely there was a large demand for it. And speaking of color coding, you can also color code on the connection tree. So if you have a test database or a production database, you can have those be different colors. Or if there's specific collections that you need to work with, you can right click and choose a color. And whenever you have any of that color coding, it's going to follow in the tabs that open up as well. So that's a nice way to be able to identify really quickly what you're working in, instead of having to take a look at the connection window, the connection string at the top of the page.
That's awesome.
And so let's see, we're taking a look at the visualization of your data, and you can also really quickly do inline editing. So if you need to update anything as you scroll through the data, maybe you see that there's a spelling mistake. When you double click, you'll be updating the data. When you click off of whatever you've changed, it's going to be automatically committed. It's automatically saved. There's nothing you need to do. There's no pop-up windows or anything you need to do to save it. When we're taking a look at Oh, looks like I should have turned off my Slack. Sorry about that. So when we are taking a look at the Visual Query Builder, this is a useful tool for writing queries. And when we're doing that, what we're going to be looking at is 3 sections here: match, projection, and sort stages. And you could use the query bar up at the top when writing queries, but if you're not super familiar with the syntax, or maybe there's a new operator that you're not sure how to use, being able to just drag and drop fields into the side panel here is a really nice way of being able to find data without having to actually write any query code manually. So we have dragged and dropped Katie, the first name Katie, into the match section. The tool will default to run a query that matches exactly whatever you've dragged and dropped. But if you need to write a different query, you can use drop-down menus, which even if you're not familiar with the operator options, it's nice to be able to see what those options are. So I should probably.
I like that it automatically at the top there too. I just noticed this, that you're putting it over here, but it's automatically filling it up at the very top where it says query.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's cool.
So you'll be able to see what the query code is automatically, and you can drag and drop as many fields over as you need. So let's say we want to find first names that contain the letter K and last names that start with the letter L. A silly example maybe, but just a good way of being able to really quickly see what this can do.
Can you
can also
drag and
build
drop
groups.
to rearrange those as well? Like drag last name above first name?
Oh yeah, you can drag and drop using the side button here.
Oh, nice.
And one thing that we actually added recently is that you can change the column orders. So if we want to drag the order of the columns around in our visualization, you can just do that really quickly, and it will save your preferences. So the next time that you open the collection, that new column order will be saved. There's also the option of building groups. So if you need to build an and or nor group, this can be a nice way of visualizing that. So if you're looking for first names that start with L, or first names that start with K, last names that start with L, or anyone that has a city that matches. Let's see, where can we find? We'll expand the address field because you can always show all embedded fields in Studio 3T, so we can show all fields, and then we'll find everybody where the state equals New Jersey. So this is a good way of being able to really quickly figure out how to write that query and then troubleshoot it and make sure that it's exactly what you need.
And most importantly, when you do this through Shell, you don't have to, I don't know about you, Karthik, but I don't know how much time I spend counting my brackets because I'm always missing one. I'm always missing a square bracket or a curly bracket. This is awesome.
Yeah, I don't use my shell at all. I use like Sublime or something just to make sure my formatting is all good, and then bring it over here. So this is awesome. I was I had a question for you, Becky. Like so I mean, like, yeah, this is great. Like I can use the UI, and even I know there's a SQL option. Is there a way where Studio 3T can recommend optimized indexes for a given query, looking at the query predicates? Do you guys have something about indexing?
That's something that we'd like to add to Studio 3T eventually, but for now we don't have any automated recommendations. One of the challenges that we've had with adding automated recommendations is that in terms of performance tuning, what you'll want is to really take a look at how often a query is going to be executed, because if you're adding an index and it's to improve the performance of a query that's run very infrequently, it could actually impact the performance of other queries that are run more frequently. And even if the impact isn't huge, if those queries that are impacted negatively are being run really frequently, then the overall impact of performance would be negative. So having a tool that can make suggestions intelligently has been a challenge for us so far, but that it's something that we would like to look into doing eventually. So
Okay.
One thing that you can do, though, is if you are taking a look at uh, your performance, what you can check is if you're thinking that there's something that's not, if there's a query that you think is running not very efficiently, you can take a look at the current operations panel. And this is where all slow running queries would be displayed. So we
Oh,
can
nice.
show slow running queries only based on how slowly it's running. So if you want to really pinpoint just the extremely slow running queries, you could choose to look at queries that are running for 30 seconds or more. If you want to let this page sit for a minute so you can explore that query and take
Oh,
a look
wow.
at the information, you can choose the update frequency, so you can have it updating really frequently, or you can have it sit for 5 minutes so you can really do a deep dive. And unfortunately, I don't have any queries running right now on my database because this is just a test database, but you'd have a log style here with information about the query type, how long it's been running. If there's something that you need to kill in order to improve performance, you can kill operations. You can filter by query type, and you can also choose to view performance for all collections, all databases, and
And
even
this is really
switch
helpful.
collections
Yeah,
here.
this is helpful because one thing we recommend our customers to do is, build a process to see if there are any long running queries or abandoned queries that they need to terminate, right? And
Hmm, hmm.
it's an effort on the customer side, but with this, I think it simplifies that effort, and they can just look at it and terminate it from the UI. Makes it very easy.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's good to know.
And also, if you know that you're having performance issues due to the fact that you need an index, you can right click, go to add index. And this makes it a lot easier to add an index than having to go to the shell and do it from the shell. You don't have to look up the syntax
Oh, so
for
you
it.
can create an index from here. It just doesn't recommend, but you can add an index. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
so you can create an index maybe on email, click add fields, choose the email field, and then choose your index type from a drop down menu. And then you have all of the options that you need
Oh, wow.
available in the boxes down below, and also in these tabs here. So it gives you, just even having the tabs is a nice indicator for what your options are and how to do it. And obviously, if this is a production database, you'd want to create it in background. That is
Indexing.
by default unchecked just because of it's similar to how it is in the shell as well. If you were to write this from the shell, you need to specify that you need to create it in background. But this is important to take a look at if you're going to be doing this on production.
Yep.
And don't forget, you can also copy and paste indexes from the connection window. So that could be a fast way to add an index using the GUI and then copy and paste those over into different environments after you've created them and tested them.
That's cool. So when at the beginning of this show, you talked about copying collections, right? When I
Mhm.
copy the collection, will it copy the indexes as well, or just the data?
Yes, it also copies indexes.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. So then, one thing that you mentioned was that you're always leaving curly brackets off and
Always.
having syntax errors. The Intellishell is a tool that's pretty much the exact same thing as working with the shell from the command line, but it's embedded within Studio 3T, and we've added some extra functionality around it. So this is the IDE section of Studio 3T, where if you have syntax errors, those will be highlighted. You'll have auto populate for operator names, field names, collection names. When you execute a query, you have all the visualizations of your data, so it's a lot prettier than working with your data from the shell, where it's just this wall of text. And even the pretty function doesn't make it beautiful, right? So we've got the different view options. You can color code field types. Everything I've already covered, you'd be able to do here, as well as doing inline editing if you need to. Um, One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that throughout Studio 3T, whether it be the Intellishell, other tools that I haven't covered yet, or the collection tool, you can always go to the query code tab to see the translation of your query. So whether you're writing a query from
Oh, nice.
the Visual Query Builder or from the Intellishell or elsewhere, you'd be able to go to the query code tab and take a look at the Mongo shell code in its entirety, as well as translations to whatever language you're developing in, whether it be JavaScript, Java, C#, Python, PHP, etc.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can basically copy this and build my DAO layer in my application.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So
Nice.
this is one of the most popular tools in Studio 3T, just because it's so much faster than having to do those translations by hand. Yeah, yeah. So then, yeah, with the Intellishell, you've got the query code translation available here as well. It's also popular to pin results. That way you can change your query and then rerun it and see how the results have changed. And for those of you who are huge fans of working with a shell environment, you can always turn off the query assist. And when you do that, you would have raw shell output as an option. So you can still have raw shell style prompts and output, and you can also do side-by-side view. So that way you can run scripts and see the results side by side. So that's a nice option for those who prefer to work that way. A lot of people will use this kind of as a workbench because you can save queries locally and then open them whenever you need to. So whenever you do that, you'd be able to then run the statement at cursor. So a lot of people will just have all the scripts that they're working on that week or that month saved in the same document, and then you can open this up and then just continue working on troubleshooting that specific query by running the statement at cursor until you've perfected it, and then you can send that to your colleagues or do whatever it is that you need to do with that. But kind of have like a workbench in the Intellishell, so that way you don't have to be copying and pasting into the shell from elsewhere. Another popular tool that folks like to work with in CO3T is the option of being able to run SQL queries from within CO3T. So what I mean by this is that when you're just starting working in NoSQL, it can be a bit frustrating to try and look up the syntax for everything that you need to do from day one. So you can open up the SQL tool, which is right next to Intellishell. And if I open up a saved query, we can execute this statement. Looks like I'm running it on the wrong database. Let me open up a different collection here. So we would execute the statement in order to see the results down below. What's actually happening is CO3T is translating your query to Mongo shell syntax and then running that translated query in order to return the results. So the query code tab is definitely an important part of this tool in particular, because this is where you can go to take a look at the Mongo shell translation. So we do have all the translations that we support to the developing languages that you might be developing in, but the shell language would be the most important part. So that way you can write a query in SQL really quickly. It's a syntax that you're probably more familiar with. It's also just honestly sometimes easier to write in. And maybe you're not sure how to write a join in SQL in a NoSQL syntax. So you can write a join in SQL and then see what the NoSQL equivalent would be of that query. And we can take a look at these operators here. Project, lookup, and unwind is a very common usage of the aggregate framework in NoSQL. So this would be a good indicator that these are operators to look up and become more familiar with. Lookup. And you can also copy and paste this query and open it in the Intellishell or in the aggregate editor, which I'll show you next. But this is just a nice tool for being able to start learning how to write those NoSQL queries that you already know how to write in SQL syntax.
That's awesome, Becky. So basically, what you're saying is you can use NoSQL and write SQL queries, right? So
Yeah.
which is awesome. A couple of questions for you there, Becky.
Yeah.
I've been in projects and companies where doing this translation has an overhead, right? So have you guys at Studio 3T tested what is the overhead for translating the SQL query into the Mongo query that you're showing at the bottom of the screen here?
I mean, it's not that much. honestly, that has more to do with the fact that the SQL Query Tool is designed to help people get started working with DocumentDB and MongoDB. It's designed to be for fine queries specifically. So for more complex queries, what this just our company philosophy has been that we really want people to learn NoSQL syntax and become familiar with it, because it really is the best way to make sure that you're able to access the full power of a NoSQL database, is to become more familiar with NoSQL syntax. So the SQL Query Tool hasn't been designed to do everything that you would want to do in a NoSQL database, because not everything can be mapped from SQL syntax into NoSQL syntax. So the overhead is not that bad, just because the translations aren't the most complicated translations that could possibly be imagined. You know what I mean? So this is designed to help people do those fine queries when they first get started working with NoSQL, start becoming more familiar with it, and have a good roadmap for where to start focusing in terms of what to learn next in terms of operators and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was more where I was coming from to this is like, uh, with any visualization tools, right? Like where you provide access to those tools to your back office users, they are familiar with SQL, right? So I was thinking, if those guys are like, let's say sitting on a Tableau or whatever tool it is and writing SQL queries, can that be passed to Studio 3T to be translated before sending it to DocumentDB or MongoDB, right? So that's what I was thinking.
So to see the translation but not actually see the results.
Yeah, normally a JDBC or BBC driver is required for this, right? Like that's one of the main things it does. I was trying to see if there is a way, if this is a low overhead, and if it is quick, is there some opportunities there? Is what I was thinking.
That's a good point. I think because it's been, it's used for fine queries mostly, that none of our clients have asked for that so far. And we typically try to put items on our roadmap that folks are asking for. So that hasn't been a big request as of yet, just because I think the queries that people are typically using to run in the SQL Query Tool tend to be those fine queries that aren't the most expensive queries that are causing performance issues typically. But that is a really good point. So I'll make a note of that, send that to our team. I think that's a really good idea. Yeah.
I have a question about the Intellishell. A lot of customers, and me included, run JavaScript functions through Mongo Shell. Do we still have that ability with the Intellishell?
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. That is definitely an option.
I won't ask you to write a very, very quick demo Java script function. That would be too evil. I'll take your word for it. Test that later.
I mean, if you want to chat, if you want to send me something in chat, I can copy and paste that in if you prefer. Happy to do that.
Sure. Let me find a simple one for you.
Full exposure. I am not a developer myself, so no need to see me tap out a query on the spot. It'll be not my finest moment. But yeah, if you feel like chatting that to me, I'll be happy to run that for you.
Awesome.
Cool. So then the aggregate editor is kind of the last tool in the bundle of tools that are useful for writing queries in Studio 3T. So when we open this up, what we're looking at is kind of a blank page here. Aggregate queries, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Aggregate Framework, this is a framework that's used for obviously aggregating data, but this is also where you'd be going to write queries if you needed to do something like what you'd be doing as a join in a SQL database. Obviously, with NoSQL, joins aren't as common. And there's no such thing as foreign keys in a NoSQL database. But if you needed to do something where you're pulling data from multiple collections, so long as they're on the same database, that would be something that you'd use the Aggregate Framework for. And each aggregate query is built up of stages, and it's a logic flow where each stage manipulates the data, and then the output of one stage feeds into the input of the next stage. So what we'd want to do to start off is create those stages that we're going to be working with. Each time you create a stage, a new tab will be created in Studio 3T, and for each stage, you choose your operator from the drop-down menu. You'll get some helpful tips for how to write that specific query in the editor here, and you'll also see those stages from the pipeline tab. So if I open up a saved query, again, so you don't have to watch me type out a query by hand, I have an aggregate query with 4 different stages, but sometimes these can be dozens of stages long. And if you're writing this from the shell, commenting out each of those stages to try and isolate a single stage to test it can be a bit of a pain. So by having these stages in separate tabs, you're able to troubleshoot each separately. From the pipeline tab, we can execute the full query to see the results down below. And for each individual tab, you can see the input and output side by side. And again, you can right click to show all fields. And that's a nice way of just being able to identify what you're looking at really quickly from the table view. So the input of stage 1 would be the whole collection, and the output of stage 1 would be fewer fields, because this is a project stage. So we're projecting for specific fields. The output of stage 1 would be the exact same thing as the input of stage 2. And this is a match stage where we're trying to match cities beginning with MI. And we can scroll through and see all of the cities in the input, and that the output successfully is only pulling cities beginning with MI. And you'll always see all your results. You don't need to worry about seeing just a snapshot and maybe you're missing something. The benefit to this is that if you were to take a look at the pipeline's results, and we're taking a look at average transactions for cities beginning with MI, and then listing them by state. So maybe we're worried that the data is being pulled from more than just the cities that begin with MI, and that these results are inaccurate. If you were to do this from the shell, it would be a bit of a black box. You wouldn't really be able to identify if something isn't working properly, and it would be a harder process to try and assess if these results are accurate or not. But by being able to just jump to that second stage and scroll through really quickly, it's easy to identify.
Now, I see a tab here at the end. After query code, there's explain. I'm curious, do you have the ability to, at each stage, like after the project and after the match and after the group, to do an explain, or would that just be for the entire pipeline?
So this is one thing. This is the one thing that that Studio 3T has trouble supporting in DocumentDB. Our dev team is aware of this, and we're taking a look at it. But for now, the explain tab is only going to work for MongoDB connections. So you would still need to run the Mongo explain plan from the shell in order to see your execution stats for DocumentDB.
Gotcha. So I can just copy the query code, go over to the Intellishell, and then put my dot explain at the end. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yep, that's the best way to do it for DocumentDB right now. But hopefully we'll figure out a way to get that fixed soon in an upcoming release.
Awesome.
So if we're taking a look at the pipeline tab, another thing that you can do is move stages up and down to see if changing the order of the stages affects performance in any way. And you can also exclude stages from the pipeline just to see how that affects results. So these are nice ways that you can just play around with the query with more ease and flexibility than what your options are from the shell. And after you've written the query, obviously the query code tab has your translations that you can then copy and paste into your driver code. So yeah, just in terms of being able to even identify what the different operators do and just learn NoSQL syntax, the aggregate editor can be a really useful tool for that. But especially for people who are working with aggregate queries a lot, the aggregate framework is super powerful, but it is a challenge to get it to write a query that does exactly what you want. And the aggregate editor can be a really helpful tool for making that a bit of a faster easier, less painful process. Hopefully.
I see a good learning path here, right, Becky?
Yeah.
So you start with your SQL queries and learn how to write, NoSQL query here, and then once you get a good handle of it, then you start doing it by stages to further enhance your skill, and then the last stage would be like, okay, you can write all the stages together. So
Yeah,
I like it.
exactly. Yeah. So that's the core functionality, I'd say, of CO3T, because a lot of people spend so much time writing queries. I'll now go through just a quick overview of some of the additional functionality. I think that the rest of the tools in Studio 3T are probably tools that people don't use necessarily every day, but when they do use them, saves them a lot of time. So it's just nice to have everything in a single place. So let's say you've needed to export data in the past, and exporting from the shell can be a little bit less useful than having a GUI. There is a lot of export options within CO3T. So let's say you've written a query and you'd like to just export the results. When you open the export options, you can export an entire collection or view, the current query result. If you don't want to rerun an expensive query, you can always choose current cursor, and it will export the results as you see them on your screen currently. Or you can choose selected documents first. And then you can choose your format, and the formatting options are that we support our JSON, CSV, SQL database, MongoDB, or to another collection. And also don't forget, you can also copy and paste from the connection window. But let's say you need to send somebody a CSV, or for reporting purposes, you need a CSV. And what you see at the end is one last chance to make changes to the query, choose the export target. And you can also see something that we've added really recently with our most recent update is you can now do incremental execution options, which means if you are going to be doing an export frequently and you would like to just pick up where you left off from the last export, you can configure this so that way it's only going to be exporting whatever data has been added since your last export. And this is something that ties in with our task functionality. So if you save an export as a task, you'd then be able to configure incremental execution. It will default to run on _ID, but you can choose to have this run on a different field instead of _ID.
That's interesting. So it's like marking where I left off when I last did this, so that it knows where to pick up.
Yes.
That's awesome.
One thing to note is that this will not identify schema changes on previously exported documents. So if you've had schema changes, this won't be adding fields or changing the values of fields for whatever documents were previously exported. And if you choose a field other than _ID, we definitely recommend something like a timestamp or something like that. Or if your _ID field does not get populated automatically, you'll just want to make sure that it's populating in a way that would work with incremental execution, where it will be increasing.
Okay.
But for hopefully some use cases, this will save time from having to manually write a query every single time for an export that you do frequently.
We talk about in migration strategies in general with DocumentDB, we talk about the process, right? The testing and validation, and then making adjustments and circling back, right? You're constantly going back, that flywheel of migration. And I can see that being huge, because now I can just take, you did an export of a cursor, for example. So now I have 20 records, really quick, really easy. I don't have to wait hours. I don't have to wait all this time and use up all the resources. And I validate it. I go back, I change some things, and now I pick up and try it again. It works. And then now I can start doing my performance testing to make sure that it's performant, and add a little bit more. And, maybe do an export of whatever, maybe just the results, the 50 results I have, and kind of go from there and iterate on that. That's powerful. I mean, just for that whole testing phase, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So this
Becky,
was added with the most recent update. So if anybody's using Studio 3T right now and doesn't see this, just make sure you update to the most current version.
yeah, no, this is a great functionality, and it kind of made me think it would be cool to have something similar when I copy a collection and paste it, right? So today, there's a collection I'm copying and pasting into, let's say between dev and test database, or even from Mongo to DocumentDB, and then like next day when I come in, I want to take the changes from today. As long as I just copy and paste it. So you said it's based on the ID field, and totally understand the schema part of it. But as long as if it is just with the ID field, it'll be really helpful so that it doesn't do the whole copy again.
Right. So then you would want to use the export options and configure incremental execution for that.
Yeah, I understand.
Instead of the copying and pasting. I think the copying and pasting would be, you'd have a little bit less control. So I definitely recommend just having that extra control layer by using the export options and using the configure incremental execution. But I see what you're saying. And if there was a good way to add that control to the copy and paste options, I think that would be pretty cool. So I do like that idea. Yeah.
So what we can do, Karthik, is we can create some screenshot mock-ups of what we want it to look like, and we can send those over to Becky.
Yeah,
kind of
for
help
sure.
control that path.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
That'd
it's
be
just
super cool.
I'll just copy this and paste copy and paste.
See notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but this is a great feature.
Yeah, my colleagues will love that. This is a screenshot of what already exists. You don't get it.
We're halfway there. See?
Yeah.
That's one way to motivate.
And then the import options, we support all the same formats: JSON, CSV, SQL database, BSON, and another collection. While we're talking about import export, I'll just give a shout out to the fact that there's a SQL migration tool in Studio 3T. We're not going to have enough time to cover how this works, but I just wanted to just shout out that this exists, that anyone who's going to be migrating to or from a SQL database and a NoSQL database can connect directly to a SQL database and a NoSQL database, and then use the tool to either collapse multiple SQL tables into a single collection using foreign keys, and restructure the data so that way you have embedded objects and arrays, and the tool will actually import all of that data for you and do the restructuring at the same time. And same thing with the other direction, where you can take a collection and split it up into many SQL tables, and the foreign keys would automatically be generated for you.
All right, you just took us into a store and said there's a bunch of really cool toys over there, but you can't go play with them. Just know that there's toys over there. That's not fair. I'm assuming though, but obviously we could probably spend another hour just talking about that. I'm assuming y'all have some pretty good documentation that we could look up for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. The knowledge base for Studio 3T is really great. We've always focused on making sure the knowledge base is good, so that way people can figure out how to use this stuff on their own. Every tool has a really great article on our knowledge base, but I'll just give you a quick intro. Let's say I've got a country table in my SQL database and a city table. I would like to combine those two into a single collection. We've got the option here of going into the mappings, where I will see every single field that will be created for all the documents that are going to be created in the NoSQL database. And to add that city table, because we're looking at all the columns from the country table. To add the city table, I'd want to add an array because I'd have many cities for each country. So I'll go to add an array, but you can always just add field by field or add an object and then add fields. So the array content will be an object with a field per column. There's a lot of options here, but just a really quick example. I've added now an array.
Oh, wow.
For the city table, and we have, for each country, we have an array of cities. So if I were to run this migration right now, I would have each document would be a country with an array of cities. And if you need to make changes, you can delete fields. You can move fields in and out of embedded objects and arrays. And as you make those changes, you'll see that in the JSON output preview.
That's huge. Holy cow. Yeah. I'll play with that. We might have you back for a second session just for
I'd be
discussion
happy
around
to
this.
join. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So in my past lives where I've helped customers to migrate from relational, there were like dedicated tools that were just doing the denormalization or the document data modeling to document modeling effort. This is fantastic. It's all in one place. You can not just like do the denormalization, you can migrate and test it all in one go.
Yeah, and shout out to our friends at Accolade. They're
Yeah,
good
I've used
folks,
them.
and
Mhm.
we have added a couple months ago. We added an integration so that way anyone who works with Accolade currently can do all of that denormalization within Accolade if they prefer. So you obviously can do that from within Studio 3T by going to the mapping section and working the way I just showed you. But if you already work with Accolade, you can just add a Accolade file here and then run the migration without having to do the mapping section within Studio 3T. So if you prefer to work with Accolade, you can do that without having to redo it in Studio 3T. And then Studio 3T would
That's
take care of the
impressive.
actual importing of the data.
All right, you let us browse the toy aisle. I'm good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. The reason I was going to skip SQL migration was actually because I thought for this audience, what would be more useful would be the Schema tool. This is a tool that was designed after somebody came to us after we released the SQL migration tool and said, this is great, but all of my data is already in NoSQL and I need to do a schema restructure within NoSQL. What do you have for me? And we were like, nothing as of now, but we decided to build something because we know that a lot of people who work with NoSQL for a long time tend to have kind of a midlife crisis at a certain point and need to do some data restructuring for performance issues purposes. So this is the tool that we have designed that was inspired by the SQL migration tool, but this is for NoSQL to NoSQL migration. And just like for people who might be using the connection copy and paste options, this is a beefier version of that. So this is going to let you have a lot more control when migrating data. So if you needed to migrate from an older version and you're updating your version of your database and you need to make some changes while you're doing that update, or maybe you're having performance issues because you have too many levels of embedding within a single collection, you need to split those embedded fields up and send them to different collections. Or maybe your team is writing way too many aggregate queries and you need to combine and merge multiple collections. Quite often people will start off with the SQL migration tool and then fine tune everything within Schema. But this is the tool that lets you do all of that with a GUI instead of having to write scripts. To get started, you'd want to have all the fields that you're going to be working with on the left-hand table, and you'd be making the changes that you actually want to see to the right-hand side. This is a non-destructive tool, meaning I'm working with the university's collection right now, and it's not going to actually alter the data that's in the university's collection just for safety purposes. So I'm going to merge with another collection to show you what that looks like. I'm going to merge with the courses collection, and I have a field that connects both of these collections. I'll choose that field course number here. And then when I move through the next few menus, I now have all the fields available on the left-hand table that I need to work with for this Schema migration, because we're going to be migrating this data into a brand new collection. I'm going to go to add target collection and just choose which database and what collection I want to migrate this data into. So I'm going to create a new collection called Schema. And from here, I now have all of the fields available in both collections. If I run this right now, I would have combined those two collections into a single collection called Schema. Those original collections won't have been altered. You can see a JSON preview of what these documents will look like at the bottom. Some of the other examples of how to use this would be if you have you want to restructure things, you can take data out of the embedded level using these arrows at the top. So you can move embedded fields towards the root level. You can also move data into the embedded level. So I'm going to embed city into country. You can rename fields by just really quickly changing the name here. You can change the field type. So if you have field type errors, you can change them. You can change the source field by double clicking, and everything that's in that left-hand table will be available to choose from on the right-hand side as a source field. And basic changes are also an option of adding a new field, renaming a field, deleting a field. And if what you need to do is send fields to a different collection, so essentially take one collection and split it up into many, you can extract fields to a different collection one by one, or you can unwind an array or an object as well.
This is blowing my mind. This is blowing my mind, honestly. I mean, this is crazy, because one of the reasons we pick a document database in the first place, like one of the reasons that you go with a MongoDB or DocumentDB is that lack of schema, right? I can add whatever fields I want to whenever I want. Like I have customers that will come up with new pricing plans or new programs, and they want to add that field to it, and then recalculate everything and update the documents, right? But what happens, and we don't talk about that enough, is as you change, and with that ability to create whatever you want, your structure, your schema kind of can get out of whack, and it doesn't work as efficiently with the engine as you want it to. And I even think about customers that are doing those migrations, moving over from something else over to DocumentDB. We Karthik and I talk a lot about indexes and the reference model or the embedded model. Is it better to do a join, or do you want to just embed that document into it? And it's not light lifting. I mean, it's pretty heavy lifting to ask a development team to go change your just even the basic process of changing your document model to test it, just to get to that point. So this is just, I'm just thinking about the usability of this as customers are looking at, hey, we've had these documents out there for a while. Can we test moving something around, combining it to one, and then seeing what it works like with this index, for example? I see this just being a hugely powerful tool. I'm going to start using the heck out of this.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, I think that this can take something that would be done in emergency purposes almost and make it something that is more accessible for sure. Just because it's going to make it something that you can do on the fly. It's not going to be destroying the original data source. So it's not like this thing that you do and then you can't go back. You're actually just doing this to be able to create that new schema structure and then run those tests that you need to run, just to have it be more exploratory. So it's going to be something that you can do as just exploring your options. It's going to be.
Can the target be a different connection, like a different cluster altogether?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. For sure.
Becky, what about the source then? I know you said reschema. So, and we're talking about, okay, I have an existing or few existing collections and you're merging. That's the example you showed, which is, I totally understand the reason and the need for it. What if I want to migrate from another document database into DocumentDB, let's say Couchbase, right? So if I want to migrate, do you have like connection things? Like I see a SQL migration that has, I can connect to my SQL Server and so on. And you mentioned reschema as more for NoSQL, right? Like what if I want to come from Couchbase, which is like the same stuff. Yeah. And then also Cassandra, right? Which is a totally different type of NoSQL. And if I want to move into DocumentDB, maybe my access patterns have changed now.
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is more kind of where we're thinking about in terms of growing as we develop our tool. Our biggest non-MongoDB user base is DocumentDB, Cosmos DB. Those are the databases that are most similar to the MongoDB code base, and are pretty much the exact same thing. We do not officially support connecting to Couchbase or Cassandra. These are things that we've put out there as options for maybe places that we can go in terms of developing and growing as a company. But for now, it's not officially supported. You can always connect and try and see if it works, but it's not officially supported at this point. But These are all exciting places that we can think about in terms of trying to grow in the future. But for now, I would stick to the MongoDB code base. Yeah.
But that's fair. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you see a demand, then yeah. But I was just curious to see what that was. So it looks like
give us something. We're always asking more. This is awesome, regardless.
And keep those ideas coming, because this is hearing what people say would be useful to them is honestly how we decide what to add next. So it's important for us to hear what people would like to use and have use cases for. So definitely, please do let me know.
100%. You know, even at AWS, that's the thing that we always talk about is when people ask why we come out with new features or why we come out with new services, and it's like you said, it comes directly from our customers. I mean, 90% of what we build is not because we want it; it's because you're asking us for it. So that's awesome. That's definitely a trait that we share.
Yeah, and it's actually with the whole pandemic, it's been kind of one of the things that we've been sad about as a company is not being able to attend events and conferences, because there was so many great ideas that we would have heard at the end of a conference that we'd just be like sitting there trying to write them all down. SQL migration and reschema came from folks that we spoke to at conferences who just walked up to our booth, saw the tool and said, what would be really helpful for me? And we were like, that's great. That's brilliant.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. I know we only got a couple other minutes. I'll just really quickly show that there's a tool that you can run for just a casual schema report called Schema Analysis, which is right next to reschema. And when you run this report, this is useful for seeing things like having naming convention errors. I have 3 different versions of username. So because what this report's showing you is every single field that exists in your collection and the likelihood that it exists. So obviously certain fields are going to be occurring more commonly than others. And you can double click to run a query. So you can find all the documents that have an incorrect field name to track it down. And in CO3T, you can do bulk edits really quickly by making whatever change you need to make and then changing the drop-down menu to show that you'll rename this field in all the documents that match the query criteria. And that's something that you can do throughout CO3T, that bulk edit option. But yeah, the schema report can be really helpful for catching field type errors, naming convention errors. And for anyone who's going to be doing a data migration and would like to do a comparison, you can choose to compare 2 different connections. So I've got a DocumentDB connection here and a MongoDB connection. If we take a look at the demo customers collection, I made a few changes to that collection. We can drag and drop, and when we run this analysis, we'll see an overview of all the documents that are the same and how many documents are different between these 2 collections. And you can then see every single document with the differences highlighted. So there's about 1,000 documents in both collections, but only the documents that are different will be displayed here. And you can sync between the 2. So if there's been something that was missed in the migration, or if you've been doing testing, you need to roll back, or you just want to see what's changed after testing. Obviously you don't have to do a comparison between DocumentDB and MongoDB. You can do that between different, maybe QA and test environments. But this is useful for situations like that.
So it's yet another tool brought in, like the Accolade thing or the mapping thing here. It's like a beyond compare or a diff. Which is awesome.
Yeah. So this is we like to call the CO3T toolkit, just because there's a lot that people don't expect CO3T to be able to do. They imagine that it'll be something that can help them write queries, but there is a lot of functionality that goes beyond just the querying functionality that you'd expect from a database GUI or an IDE. So we've tried to create a toolkit that prepares people for working with NoSQL in just a holistic perspective. Anything that you're going to be doing regularly or anything that's going to take you a long time, we've tried to add functionality to the tool that can help people with that.
That's fantastic. Great tool, and rightly called a toolkit. I'm impressed with what this offers to our developers. We have about a minute, Becky. Is there any last minute call to action you want to make here for the folks?
There's a Studio 3T free trial. It's 30 days. Just go to the Studio 3T website, go to download it, and you'll automatically have the free trial. Reach out if you'd like to do a demo or ask questions. We're always happy to support. And just thank you, Karthik, for having me. It was a lot of fun doing this demo session with you. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you for joining the show. We learned a lot for sure. I'm sure our audience did as well, and we'll make this recording available for the broader community out there. Thank you, Becky.
Awesome. Thank you, and thank you, Cody.
Becky. Yeah, thank you so much.
It was fun. All right.
All right.
I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.